Absolute wisdom cannot be expressed in words, not because the enlightened ones want to hide it, but because language is inherently incapable of containing it. Anything expressed in words becomes a distorted version of the truth. Words are just tools, but when used to describe something beyond the ordinary perception, it is like trying to scoop up the whole ocean with a small cup. Human thinking is limited by the very language system it uses when we talk about something. We are using pre-existing concepts to express it. But ultimate wisdom is not a concept. It is a living reality that cannot be framed in any system of thought. As soon as we give it a name, it becomes something else. Something that can be defined, misunderstood, interpreted in countless different ways. This is why enlightened ones often avoid answering metaphysical questions directly. Take the example of Buddha. When someone asked about the universe, about existence after death, or about the absolute nature of reality, he chose to remain silent, not because he did not know, but because any answer would create false attachment. If he said that there is an existence after death, people would cling to it as an absolute truth. Whereas reality is beyond any concept of yes or no. If he said that there is nothing after death, people would fall into nihilism, which is also not the truth. Language always puts people in a dualistic state, whereas absolute wisdom is beyond that dichotomy. Enlightened beings understand that if they try to communicate in words, people will understand in their own way, and not according to the true nature of truth. People have a personal database accumulated from life experiences, and when they hear something, they automatically interpret it based on what they already know. But the ultimate truth cannot be approached that way. If a person is not experienced enough, they will only grasp a small part of the truth. Or worse, they will understand completely wrong. That is why the great intellectuals in history tend to use indirect methods to teach their students. They do not give a straightforward answer. They use guidance to let the student find the answer through their own experience, because when the truth is realized directly, it will no longer be a concept. It will become a living truth that goes beyond all our words. The human brain is not designed to directly perceive the ultimate reality from birth. We are programmed to think in patterns using cause and effect logic to explain the world. But absolute intelligence does not work that way. It has no beginning, no end, no bounds by time or space, while our thinking is based entirely on division and definition. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a clear demonstration of how people misunderstand intelligence. Those who know little often think they have it all figured out, while those who have actually reached a high level of understanding realize more the limitations of thinking. This explains why true masters, the more enlightened they become, the less they speak or even refuse to teach directly. They cannot convey absolute wisdom in words because the listener can only receive it to a certain extent, and in many cases that extent is completely wrong. The human brain works in a linear way, meaning it is always looking for cause and effect, always trying to impose some order on the world, but reality is usually not linear. One can ask, where do we go after death? But this question assumes that there must be some place after death, when in reality the concept of where to go only makes sense in the three-dimensional space we live in when enlightened masters refuse to answer. Not because they do not know, but because any answer will be misinterpreted by the limited way of thinking of humans. Like if you are trying to explain colors to someone who was born blind. You can describe red as hot, blue as cold, but no matter how hard one tries, one can never really understand the meaning of the color. They will only relate it to what they already know. The feeling of hot and cold, but the nature of color is still beyond their comprehension. Just like that, when enlightened beings try to talk about ultimate reality, the listener will only understand it according to what they have experienced before, which is almost always wrong. This is also the reason why many people, when they hear about concepts like no self, timeless, non-duality, often find it difficult to understand or even outright reject them. Obviously, the brain is not programmed to accept such things. It naturally seeks stability, clarity, whereas absolute wisdom is the dissolution of all definitions. So if a person is not ready cognitively, they will not be able to understand what the enlightened beings are trying to convey, even when explained most clearly. And that is why the enlightened beings choose to remain silent or just lead their students to a state where they can realize the truth for themselves, because only through direct experience can one truly understand Bodhidharma, the founder of Zen Buddhism. When he arrived in China, he did not teach with long Dharma talks, nor did he try to convince anyone of the truth. He just sat silently in meditation, facing a wall for 9 years without saying a word. The people around him did not understand. They looked at him with suspicion and even considered him a madman. But those who were destined to realize it would understand that he did not teach with words, but with his own absolute presence. 9 years of meditation is not meaningless silence, but the most powerful message. Truth cannot be expressed in words. It cannot be framed in thoughts or concepts. It can only be seen directly in the deep silence of the mind. If you are still searching outside, you still need someone to explain it to you. That means you are not ready, because true wisdom does not come from books. It does not come from teachings. It can only be realized in the absolute awareness within yourself. Another story is about a Zen student who came to his teacher and asked about the absolute truth. But instead of answering, he did not answer. The Zen master just smiled. The Zen master continued to ask day after day, but still received only a smile or silence. His patience was gradually exhausted. His mind was filled with doubt whether the master did not know the answer, or was he testing him. But then one day, when his mind completely let go of doubt, when he no longer expected an answer from outside, suddenly he was enlightened in the moment of no longer searching. He realized that the answer was never in words. It was always there, right? In the silence of the master, in the moment of stillness, where there was no more question, no more desire. And that is the nature of true wisdom. Once it is realized, every question becomes meaningless. Krishnamurti, one of the great enlightened beings of the 20th century, was once expected to become the spiritual leader of a large organization where thousands of people were ready to follow him as an enlightened master. But in 1929, he shocked the world by announcing the dissolution of his organization, renounce all names, all systems of teaching, and frankly declare truth is a pathless land. There is no path to the truth. He rejected all forms of traditional teaching. Not because he denied the truth, but because he understood an important truth. When people cling to any doctrine, they will turn it into a belief system instead of experiencing reality for themselves. They are no longer really looking for the truth, but only looking for a path. There is a dogma to cling to, but truth cannot be framed in a system. It cannot be imitated or followed a predetermined path. If a path is laid out, people will follow it mechanically. But that is not awakening. It is just unconscious obedience. So he did not accept anyone as a student, did not let anyone follow him, did not build a religion. did not let anyone turn his words into a doctrine. He forced people to find their own path, because if you really want to see the truth, you cannot follow in the footsteps of others. You have to walk alone. These stories lead to one thing: in common wisdom is not in words, but in silent awareness itself. If one still seeks an answer through thinking, they will only get concepts that are distorted by dualistic thinking. But when they let go of every question, when they no longer crave for an answer from outside, when they actually face themselves without any explanation, then the truth will reveal itself not as an idea, but as a living reality that cannot be expressed. Then how can the student realize it for himself? If absolute wisdom cannot be communicated in words, if the masters refuse to explain it thoroughly, then what should the student do to realize the truth for himself? Stop looking for a ready answer. That is the first thing a student needs to realize. If you go to an enlightened person with the desire to hear a final truth, an absolute answer, then from that moment you are on the wrong track, because anything that can be expressed in words is not the real truth. Every answer, no matter how perfect it seems, is just a small piece of the truth. And if you cling to it, you will lock yourself in a framework of thinking, a belief system that never really touches reality. The great enlightened people, they do not establish dogmas. They do not build a belief system for others to follow them. Know that anything expressed will become an obstacle, because when people cling to an idea, they will stop there instead of experiencing it for themselves. So if a certain knowledge makes you feel bound, if a certain theory makes you just believe without observing yourself, stop, check yourself, look deep into yourself, and do not believe in anything, even what is said by people you respect the most, because truth is not in words. It can only be realized in your own awareness. There is a common mistake that most people make. They think that knowledge and wisdom are the same. They think that a person who reads a lot of books, has a deep understanding, can debate philosophical or scientific issues. Then that person is a wise person, but this is not true. Knowledge is something that can be learned, can be copied from others, can be memorized and used as a tool. But wisdom is completely different. It cannot be taught, cannot be copied, cannot be achieved just by reading or listening. Wisdom is not something that can be accumulated. It is a state of awareness. A person who reads hundreds of books on meditation, knows all the theories of enlightenment, can clearly explain about egolessness, emptiness, absolute truth. But when that person is faced with loss, with suffering, they still react the same way as everyone else. Fear, clinging, anger. Knowledge theirs cannot help them to be liberated, because it is just something borrowed from the outside. They know about enlightenment, but they do not live in enlightenment. This is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is information. Wisdom is a deep understanding from within. A person can learn about the impermanent nature of the world, but only when they actually witness everything disappearing before their eyes, when a loved one passes away, when fame fades, when the things they once believed in collapse. Then they truly understand what impermanence is. That understanding is no longer a concept, but a living awareness, an undeniable truth, and that is wisdom. A person can read about love, listen to poems praising love, but if they have never been in love, all they know is just theory. They can describe love in flowery words, but they do not truly understand it. The same way a person can talk very well about enlightenment, but if they have never experienced the moment of awakening for themselves, then all they say is just repetition of others. So how to develop wisdom instead of just accumulating knowledge, experience, instead of just reading, observe. instead of just analyzing, live with reality instead of trying to define it. If you want to understand the silence of the enlightened ones, don't just read about it. Practice silence yourself. If you want to understand meditation, don't just learn about it. Sit down and feel the present moment yourself. If you want to understand impermanence, don't just listen to others talk about it. Look straight at the changes that are taking place in your life. Knowledge can be forgotten, but wisdom cannot. When a person truly understands something with all his soul, that understanding becomes a part of them that cannot be separated. That is why masters do not teach like a professor, but they guide the learner to his own experience, because only when you see yourself understand, then wisdom really appears. Not all enlightened people choose to be silent or only teach to a few people. There have been enlightened people who tried to spread the truth widely. But what is the result when a truth is taught too much? It gradually becomes corrupted. What is originally pure and enlightening will be distorted, simplified, even exploited to serve purposes that it was not originally intended. When Buddhism was in its primitive form, it was not a religion with a complex system of temples, rituals, or rigid doctrines. Buddha simply showed the way for people to liberate themselves from suffering. But as this teaching spread, it lost its originality. It became an organization, a system, something that could be memorized and taught, but it was no longer a personal journey of experience. As it was originally, people started arguing about which teaching was right and which teaching was wrong, who had the authority to teach and who did not. From a path to liberation, it became a web of rules, of belief, of hierarchy, and many people followed it without understanding its true spirit. The same thing happened with Taoism originally. Lao Tzu did not intend to found a religion. He only left behind the Tao Te Ching, a work containing profound thoughts about the workings of the universe and how humans can harmonize with the Tao. But as this thought spread, it was transformed into different schools, with magical rituals even exploited for profit. The truth was no longer something to experience directly, but became a system for humans to believe in. And when something becomes a belief, it is no longer another living truth. Even Western philosophy is not immune to this fate. Socrates once emphasized that I only know that I know nothing, because he understood that true wisdom does not lie in ready-made answers, but in constant self-questioning. But later, philosophy was turned into theoretical systems where people argued about who was right and who was wrong, instead of using philosophy to self-realize. When an idea becomes a system, it is no longer a tool for enlightenment, but becomes a framework for people to get stuck in. Why does this happen? Because humans tend to turn everything into a controllable system. We don't like ambiguity. We don't like things that can't be grasped. So when we approach a truth that is too broad, we try to frame it in words of rules and dogmas. But as soon as the truth is framed, it is no longer the truth. It is just a distorted version, a shadow of the original truth. Looking back at history, we see that the greatest truths are usually not written in books, not widely spread, but only passed from teacher to student, from those who are truly ready to receive. Because the masters understand that too much teaching can destroy the very truth they want to preserve. Once the truth is repeated too much, it is no longer something to experience, but becomes a dogma to believe. And when people only believe without experiencing, they no longer have access to the truth. So those who truly seek wisdom should not cling to available systems. One should not believe in what is taught blindly. One should ask questions. One should experience. One should discover for oneself. Because wisdom does not lie in words repeated thousands of times, but in the direct perception of each individual. And that is why masters do not rush to teach everyone, because they know that only those who are truly ready can keep the truth alive instead of turning it into a lifeless body of old teachings. Great masters do not teach with words, but with nonverbal methods, and most importantly, by forcing students to experience for themselves. That is why their teaching methods are not based on theory but on experience, where the truth can be realized directly, without the need for mental interpretation. One of the most important methods is meditation. Zen Vipassana, Zen. When a Zen master teaches a student, they do not give theories. They do not explain each step in detail like a normal lesson. They simply tell the student to sit down and observe observation. No long lectures, no complex philosophical systems, just a simple act of observing one's own mind. But it is in that simplicity that the student truly comes face to face with their own nature, when there are no words to cling to. When there is no one to guide them step by step, they will be forced to look deep within themselves, and it is in that silence that the truth begins to reveal. Another paradoxical but extremely effective method is the Zen koan. Koan are illogical questions or statements, sometimes even meaningless, designed to break the rational thinking of the student. For example, when a Zen student asks what enlightenment is, then instead of answering, the Zen master might say, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" A question that cannot be answered by normal logic, and that is what puts the student's mind into a state of confusion. They cannot use their mind to understand, and if they try to think, they will never find the answer. But if they completely let go of dualistic thinking, if they directly experience that moment without try to analyze them, you will see that the answer is not in words, but in the very moment of absolute awareness. Another way that enlightened beings use to impart wisdom is to transmit energy through presence. Shaktipat Taoism. Tibet and many spiritual traditions, it is believed that a truly enlightened being does not need to say anything. Just by being present, their energy will naturally affect those who are sensitive enough. This is not mystical or magical. It is simply the resonance of a consciousness that has reached a high frequency affects those who are ready to receive. But not everyone has the opportunity to meet an enlightened being to accompany them in this world. Those who have reached the state of absolute wisdom are as rare as a drop of water in the ocean. So instead of looking for an enlightened being to accompany them, turn within yourself. Observe your inner self. Practice stillness and refine your awareness so that you can connect with the highest state of wisdom without anyone's guidance. The above methods all have a point in general. They do not teach anything new, but only force you to see what is already there. No knowledge is added, no belief is imposed, because truth cannot be given to anyone. It can only be realized by the experiencer if wisdom cannot be communicated in words. If enlightenment cannot be described in language, then why do I make so many videos to talk about these things if truth is not in knowledge but can only be realized by people's own experience? Then why on Try It Tam channel is there a whole playlist containing lectures, analyses, explanations about all aspects of mind, perception, and philosophy? I do not share these contents for you to accumulate more knowledge, but to help you remove the layers of thinking that have obscured the wisdom that is already in you. If you have ever watched the videos on the Gateway to the Mind playlist, you will see that I do not try to give a fixed system of teachings, not to assert an absolute truth. but I ask questions that break down beliefs old and open to new perspectives. Every video is not an answer, but a door, a way for you to look deeper into your own mind. However, knowledge without practice is just knowledge. That is why I created the Mindfulness Practice playlist, where you can not only listen, not only understand, but also directly experience what I am saying. Mind observation exercises, mindfulness instructions, methods to look into reality without being distorted by thinking, and methods to master your own energy source. All of that is not for you to memorize, but for you to practice yourself, experience yourself, realize, because each person is in a different state of consciousness. Each person has a different journey, and no one can go for anyone. That is why I do not just talk about one aspect, but I go into many different perspectives, from cognitive science to Buddhism, from Eastern philosophy to modern psychology, from the workings of the mind to the pitfalls of thinking. I make many videos not to create a theoretical system type, but to help you have many paths to approach the problem so that you can find the approach that best suits you. Some people come to Triyat Tam through philosophy. Some people come through Buddhism. Some people come through scientific analysis, but all of those paths lead to the same thing: your own awakening. I can choose to make simpler videos that are more accessible and more trendy. I can duplicate content to get more views, but I don't choose that path. I choose this content because I know that there will be people who are really looking for. Triyat Tam channel is not a place to give the truth, but a place to help you see for yourself the truth that has always been there currently. There are many channels that copy the content of Triyat Tam channel without knowing their real purpose. Some channels even intentionally name the same as Triyat Tam to confuse the audience. This not only affects the originality of what I share, but can also distort the true meaning of the content when a content is cut, changed in context, or used for another purpose. It can lose the original spirit and cause misunderstandings for viewers when the content is interpreted from many different perspectives. The original meaning can be gradually transformed, losing its originality and moving away from the inherent truth. I do not consider myself an enlightened person, nor do I consider myself a teacher. I simply share things that I find valuable. All the videos on Triyat Tam channel you do not need to believe or reject. Just observe yourself, experience yourself, and you will have the answer. Triyat Tam thanks you for accompanying me. I wish you and your loved ones good health, peace, and wisdom.